Hamilton, welcome. It's been a while since you came onto my podcast, but we've had a lot of interaction in between because I felt this calling to seek out some mentorship through a channel that I didn't expect was going to come my way when I went into allopathic medicine. But you had described it as spiritual surgery, what you do in the jungle at Blue Morpho. And for those who aren't, familiar with you, maybe just introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll get into the meat of the sandwich here.
Sure. Hi, it's great to see you again and speak with you today. And my name's Hamilton Souther, and I've lived in the Amazon in Peruvian Amazon for the last 20 plus years. And I became, well known for Amazonian plant medicine and visionary plant medicine practices focused in ayahuasca and San Pedro down here, although I do work with a bunch of other medicines as well. And I've been helping people from all over the world both heal and also learn these, plant medicine practices alongside all of the other amazing healing practices here in the world.
What's really compelling about your story is you're more like me than you are a native Peruvian. So was it hard for you to sort of be accepted into this practice as a foreigner, so to speak? And what were some of the elements that actually, helped you slowly become accepted into the mesa? I suppose I should say.
It was an honor in my early 20s to ultimately be accepted into an Amazonian lineage. It was a mestizo lineage that came ultimately from the San Martin region of Peru down into the Ucayali region of the Amazon between Pucallpa and Iquitos. You can look at it on the map. And it was very difficult to be accepted. Foreigners weren't accepted. It was just that simple. They were allowed to sit in ceremony, but not become part of lineage or learn.
Yeah.
And I was feeling very guided by spirit and by mission at that point. And so I just stuck with it and, you know, befriended the locals and befriended the lineage and continuously expressed over almost 2 years my desire to be allowed in. And ultimately, through a number of incredible circumstances, I was accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine it was really hard. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is actually in the beginning of the conversation is around your sort of initiation into this. And I shouldn't use the word initiation, but the first ceremonies that you did and how hard they were. Um, and also some of the psychic attacks and some of the stuff that happens that actually is in the scarier space, which we'll get to. I want to focus on the ayahuasquero part of your story. And when people hear that I'm going down to the Amazon, or they hear that I want to do this as a means of supporting birth workers or women who have had these traumatic things happen, this is where the spiritual surgery takes place. I've heard you say, for example, if you're going back over and over and over and still working with the same thing, then maybe there's a reason that for that. You describe in your sitter program, which is an online program we'll link in the show notes, that the purpose here is to go and be healed, not this continuous sort of Western idea of I'm healing, I'm healing, I'm healing. We need to go in there and extract and to reorient and to reground you back into who you are, because there's this spirit of this thing that is grabbed on, whether it be addiction or this traumatic event or whatever else. And so when I tell this story, people are like, "Oh, be careful," because they've heard for every one really, really awesome story, they've heard 10 horror stories around what happens I'm going to use plant medicine, but we're also talking about mushrooms, and which are different kingdom and all that. But there's this notion that there's a lot of bad behavior in the plant medicine space. Can you speak to how you address that at Blue Morpho, and actually how you as a man, as a husband, as a human, as a teacher, how do you relate to that? And because it naturally is going to come up when people say, "Well, I don't want to go down there with a stranger because I've heard these bad things happen." Let's talk about how we actually facilitate this in a safe way.
It's a great question. Ultimately, it comes down to integrity and ethics. And, ethical practices in Western medicine were developed over time, and a board was created to, oversee that. And it's taught through school and ultimately in your training. And I doubt it's innate for all the people that come in. or they wouldn't even need that level of training. So it's something that's
Right.
learned.
Right.
And in plant medicine, the ethics are both cultural and also learned, but they're not imposed. And so I think when you hear about the nature of the, concerns that come up, people are either interacting with practitioners that don't adhere to those ethics and those morals, or they're being instigated by a cultural mismatch that isn't appropriate. And so some of the things to understand to better address that is number one, down here, the same separation between patient and relationship with the practitioners is not under the same moral code. So you have to be very careful to not be too forward and too seeking of affirmation, even in the form of like hugging or something like that with the other practitioners. You should just meet them very nicely and be accepting of them, maybe shake their hand, but that's it.
Yeah.
And I see that there's a familiarity that Westerners come with to want to be very touchy to the maestros and the maestras, and I just don't recommend that. I recommend having just a much more respectful, a little bit more distanced relationship to start with. And then to also understand that you have to go find lineages that have a long history of integrity.
Right.
That's how they practice because it is an unregulated space. There isn't a board overseeing the ethics. And so it's track record that represents the nature of the ethics and morality of the lineage that you're working with. So I think if you come with both of those understandings, you're going, first of all, to a lineage with a long track record. And second, you don't act with any kind of familiarity to the practitioners, you will know that you're in a safe place. And, considering the nature of this teaching that I'm offering, that's how I practice. I don't, transgress that notion of familiarity with new people that I'm meeting. Only with, good friends for a long period of time do I have any kind of physical contact in the form of like a hug or anything to represent friendship. And there's just a natural formality, like if you were meeting any other kind of doctor in a Western medical space. And that way you maintain a line of professionalism and that you can get proper care.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And we can get into some of the like nooks and crannies here about emergency preparedness and whatnot. But I think it goes without saying that you're going into this, you need to come in with a clean mind, clean body. You need to, get yourself physically strong, so to speak. And then from the standpoint of the center that you're going to, having a plan for almost everything. I mean, there's obviously not a, you can't really conceive of everything that could happen, but you at least have an emergency preparedness plan from the individual to the group setting. And we can go into that later, but I think that kind of goes without, without saying. You don't go into a hospital that's on fire, or you don't go to a hospital that doesn't have electricity, right? We have to have a plan B. One of the things that people are really afraid of, there's this micro dosing phenomenon right now. The renaissance of psychedelics in the United States has really taken a turn in a lot of ways. But a lot of people will say, yeah, I'm not really into the big ceremony. I just microdose, and that gets me through. I think that what they're generally afraid of is that they've appreciated that really scary things can come up. And you introduced, and of course they can, but that's kind of the point. Is we really generally, in my sort of view, you really can't access those things until there's this filters as was it Aldous Huxley said. Aldous Huxley described this cerebral reducing valve or whatever he said. He's like, there's a lot of stuff you can't access because it's like a means of preserving your ego's preserving itself by not accessing those things. But once that valve is opened, and ayahuasca or psilocybin or cannabis in high doses can open that valve. Now you're confronted with scary things, and that is what most people gives a lot of people apprehension. So you introduce this technology of sanctuary. There's 3 tenets. Can you just describe the 3 tenets? And actually, before you do, I'll just share with everybody. Here's how a recent journey of mine went. It was very very groundbreaking for me. I even asked, I want to see something really scary. And so they brought this like dark figure in, and I would love for you to share also what your alternative approach would have been. But I immediately invoked sanctuary, went into this little kind of chrysalis bubble, and the spirit of the mushrooms had said, "Okay, that's great. You're protected. Like nothing can hurt you." It is, it's all light anyways. However, if you're going to be facilitating, you need to actually spread that sanctuary for everybody involved. You provided a slightly alternative approach for me, which you can share. But let's talk about sanctuary because this is a really, really unique thing that would have probably been helpful for you in your early ceremonies, which we'll get to in a second.
Sanctuary is a form of space holding and container for these kinds of experiences. And you'll hear often people say you have to have the right container, or you'll hear in the practice that you have to set the space,
Yeah.
you know. And so this is a question around spiritual protection, energetic protection, and also how the energies and the nature of your own psyche process within that space. And to your point about people microdosing instead of wanting to have the macrodose experience out of an expression of fear, what I would say to that is that you have to go into the subconscious because that's where you're storing the trauma. You
Mm,
store the trauma in the most subtlest part of your nervous system and in the most subtlest parts of your subconscious. And it's not in your conscious mind, which is why the conscious mind is reactive to the stimulus of the trauma and the trigger itself. And so in there is where you do find the nature of your own mental hall of mirrors and everything that scares you. And so you have to know how to navigate that. And so that's where sanctuary comes in, which is we want a sanctuary in which to explore this aspect of ourselves where we know we're 100% protected and safe. We know that we can go into this with all of the different component support we need so that we can have a really positive and efficacious journey that results in healing and it doesn't result in greater trauma, even if we have to confront something that's really scary. And so it's built on three core concepts. The first is an idea that the nature of the universe itself is within us and it's through us and it's all around us. We're not separate from it. We're not, like a fish isn't separate from the ocean. We're not separate from the universe itself. So we first talk about our interconnectedness with this phenomena of the universe. And then the second is the recognition of the infinite eternal expression of this universe. So we
mm,
go from we are connected and this connection is infinite and eternal. And then from within us, we define how we want these energies to move. And so we use five simultaneous concepts as one. So it's hard in English because English parses the
sure.
concepts, but you got to think of it as one thing. And it's the combination of healing, harmony, balance, groundedness, and the ability to reorient or reset, anything, just anything that could come up. So the combination of balancing and grounding with harmonizing energies and healing allows us to, you know, reframe, shift perspective, go from dark to light, go from fear to centeredness, love, calm, and all of that produces this kind of healing state. And within that, we know that we are safe. And so a lot of people want safety to be created by lots of perceived protections, like layer of locks and layer of alarms and things like that. But that doesn't make us feel safe. Our feeling of safety is when we just know we're not going to be harmed.
Right.
And so
Right.
we create that together. And then that sanctuary provides a space for us to be able to go in, see things that could be scary for us, things that represent trauma and loss, and ultimately reorient those into healing and transcend them.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I went on a program called Semester at Sea. I think you did as well, right? A long time ago.
Yeah.
And Semester at Sea, for everybody who doesn't know, you're on this like retired cruise ship that's been restructured into a floating campus, and there's a bunch of college kids that are all wanting to do good in the world, and you take college credits while you're at sea, or yeah, while you're sailing, and then you stop in various ports around the way. And we stopped in Brazil, which was just extraordinary as like a 19-year-old walking around in Brazil. But they're like, hey, come back to the ship by this day. Don't go to these parts unless you are asking for trouble, and we'll see you, in 5 days or whatever. And so we went to Salvador, and a number of people got mugged and jumped, and it's not because places are dangerous. I just don't believe that. But, you go in and you act like you're familiar, and you bring your little kind of machismo Western attitude in, and people sometimes maybe want to put you in your place, or they feel like you're not doing a good service maybe to their culture or whatever else. Well, when I was there, I ended up taking one day by myself and just walking all over. And I found myself in the favelas, which are the poorest parts outside on the outskirts of the major cities. And I remember seeing people looking through their like the fences at me. And when I realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm not in like a part of the city that I expected to find myself. And I ended up just like making friends along the way, and had this experience. And then meanwhile, like my roommate ended up getting jumped and mugged and was in the same part of town. And there's an interesting, that was the same person who was also afraid of that happening. So there's this tendency for us to see the world as a scary place. And if you see the world as a scary place, it is scary. And like bad things happen when you don't feel safe. But I, for whatever reason, my whole life have always felt like, not that I belong, but like a deep reverence for, the process of becoming accepted, or being seen as not a threatening person. And maybe it's even like the way my nervous system is wired. And if you go into an ayahuasca experience, or I'll use mushrooms because I've done a lot of mushroom experiences. If you go in expecting that there's going to be a horrific stuff and that you're not going to be safe, it probably will manifest. So this sanctuary, opportunity is to actually invoke a space where you do, maybe for the first time in your life, feel safe. And when this happened, you were like, "That's great." And the dark figure, by the way, I just literally blew it away. But what did you tell me? You said, "Well, I would have wondered and been curious, like, why is this figure here? Are they actually here to harm me? Because we assume, because of the media and everything else, that they're here to harm us." But tell me about that. Tell me, maybe even share an experience of your own where you were like, "Huh, I don't actually need to be afraid. Maybe I should actually be curious and lean in and see why this figure, this spirit, is coming to me."
Just like you, I mean, when I first got into these things, I thought from my own contextualization that based on the shape of what I saw, that meant, a certain kind of characteristic or quality of that energy in that space. If it were beastly or dark in its way, or carried a weapon or something like that, that it meant it was there to harm me. And ultimately, I came to realize that maybe you just need to ask. Maybe you need to investigate that more, not assume, but just start to ask it, or ask other guides that are in that awareness. Because, when you go into the visionary space, there's this extraordinary awareness to help you navigate, whether it's from the mushrooms or the ayahuasca itself, or just this omniscient presence of awareness that everyone talks about. So,
Right. Right.
it's anecdotally well known now. You're tapped into something of greater connection and awareness than you normally have without the plant medicines. And so I would ask about it, ask why it's there, where it comes from, where its origin was, how it ended up somehow in connection with me, what's its purpose, what skills does it have, why does it, in your case, carry a sword, you know, Archangel Michael for others carries a sword. It's
Right.
depicted that way all over. There's all of these Eastern philosophical effigies created holding swords, and they're protectors of temples and things like
Hmm.
that, sentinels. And I would just ask, so what is it doing? Why is it there? It's not harming me. It's not like it's coming at me and hitting at me or doing anything. It's just standing there. Does it need healing? Is it lonely? Is it
Mm-hmm.
lost? Does it need help going home? Does it know where home is anymore? I would ask all these questions. And what am I supposed to do with this? And it would give me an opportunity to find more context. And I got to have this opportunity all the time because you help people release these kinds of energies that aren't serving them in ceremony. And I would ask, well, what am I supposed to do with them? We just released them out of the subconscious of lots of people. Where do they need to go? And I realized, for us, we go home. And so I thought, well, what's their home? So, maybe
Yeah.
to us, they're parasitic or they're not helpful or they're bad or something like that. But where do they have a place in this universe where they're not harming anybody? They're just living their life and it's not a problem. And so I would seek how to, send them to those kinds of places so that they could, I don't know, continue to exist.
Yeah.
I got over my fear of what we saw in vision because I realized it was just another aspect of something deep within our own psyches and consciousness, of something under or unexplored that deserved to be recognized.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a honeybee. it comes buzzing by and you're like, oh, that thing's going to sting me. But if you kill all the honeybees, yeah, you're not going to get stung. And yet these honeybees are not interested in being out stinging you. They want to go and pollinate flowers. So we should be curious. We really should be. Um, Tell me about your first ayahuasca experience because you have a great book. I have all of your books now, and I'm just pouring through them and then going back and rereading and like trying to grasp what it was like for you to start this path that I feel like I'm starting now, but that was 20 years ago or so for you. You tell a story about your very first experience, and then maybe tell me what was it like to decide to continue despite having some really hard experiences in the beginning. I think that would have scared most people away.
My first experience was really impactful. I had only heard of two accounts of ayahuasca before encountering it. It was in 2001, at the end of 2001. I
Hmm.
was in the Amazon and I went with a guide into the forest, and we met a shaman along the way that he knew who was going to come, or a medico vegetalista who was going to make ayahuasca, and we were going to drink in a ceremony. I was elated because I had heard about it, and one account was from a person who in the 1970s drove a VW bus from the US all the way down to Panama and then shipped it to Colombia and went down into the Amazon and met people drinking ayahuasca and drank, and that person's response to me when I asked them, well, what's it like? They just said, whoa, the hands of God. And that
Wow.
was it. That was the whole you know accounting of the experience. So I didn't have any context for that. That was meaningless for me at that period of time. I wouldn't have understood. It went right over my head. And the other
Hmm.
one was in a book I read where the person drank ayahuasca and they said that it moved faster than they had ever moved. It was scarier. It was more intense, vision after vision after vision. And I thought the person had overwritten,
Yeah.
You think someone's
Yeah.
exaggerating the
Uh-huh.
nature of the experience. So those are my only two experiences of anybody, who had ever even talked about it. And there I was along this little river, a tributary to the Amazon, sitting there with a medico vegetalista by myself. We had collected ayahuasca and chacruna that day, and we made it, in the forest on just on a couple logs that we built a little fire on and made this concoction. And we sat down and he poured me a pretty, what I know now is a pretty big dose. At that time, I didn't know that, so I had no context. And I drank this sitting on a riverbank and under some moonlight. And I thought to myself, like, how did I get here? This is just, I was a kid in the U.S., had graduated from college, and how did I get here? It was so exciting at that time. And then after about 15 minutes, like I thought, I don't understand why people throw this up. It felt so home, that
Hmm.
situation in that moment. And then it only took about 2 more minutes and something had changed. My stomach was churning, and the shaman had started using a shakapa, this leaf instrument, this rattle that goes and as he did that, I started to see geometric colors and patterns start to form all around me. And they weren't in me, they were beyond me, and they overwhelmed the entire forest. And then I thought to myself, oh, wow. Like I started to feel it turn on. And I thought to myself, if this doesn't get any stronger, I'll be okay. And it kept getting stronger for another 4.5 hours. So from that moment on, I wasn't okay anymore. I was way beyond okay.
Yeah.
And then I started purging and having visions, and I felt sick, and I had thoughts that weren't true. Like I thought I had been poisoned. I thought I was dying. None of that was true. I was actually being healed. It was very strange as I started to go into that process. And I purged a bunch. I resisted a lot. I didn't understand. Now I help people relax through that and embrace the experience and go into the sacred patterns. And I just didn't have any of that direction. So I didn't know what to do. So I just resisted, and that was very difficult. And then the most amazing thing happened, and this is why I came back, which is that uh, it felt like my psyche exploded into 50,000 strobe lights. My subconscious was completely on. And everything that had ever happened to me that was negative that I didn't even remember, but from the time I was born until that moment was like being defragmented, like a disc defrag, being
Yeah.
like stretched apart and then addressed in flashes of light and purging and healing in a way that I had no reference for. I just had this voice saying, do the work, do the work. I didn't understand what the work was. Do this, do the work. And the work was to reconcile all of it. And I just reconciled my entire life over the next 4 hours. And then something magic, I mean, that was already quite magic, but something truly mysterious happened. I couldn't break through. Something was still holding me back. And finally, the medico vegetalista came with a mapacho and blew mapacho smoke over my body.
The type of
And I
tobacco.
thought, tobacco, yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought it was this wretched smell. And I just felt this wretched heave come. And I threw up a semi solid object. It came right out of me. It was about the size of a lime to a small lemon. It was bright neon green in the vision, but it was physical in its nature. It held its shape for a period of time and it stretched my esophagus to come out. And when it did, this difficulty I'd had from early childhood that had caused me to the experience of depression from early childhood through my really early young adult life just melted away. When
Mm.
that thing came out of me, a magnificent mystical healing took place that is very hard to describe to others who haven't experienced it. But this core of something that just felt like weight and negativity and darkness inside of me that would weigh me down into the lower frequencies of depression were gone. And I felt my vision and my body lighten. I felt light. I felt like this relief came over me, but it was a relief that had been built up for 15, 20 years. And it was released in that moment. And the vision became very heavenly in the way that you would imagine that pastel colors, bright lights, uh, beings that were winged and filled with light, and animals that were the same way, from dark and scary to this like very jovial kind of space. And they were all congratulating me and cheering that I had found my apprenticeship and that I was going to stay there and I was going to learn there. And that was the final vision. And then everything calmed down.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe that it could be true, but it turned out to be exactly like that. That vision came true. I ended up apprenticing in a place that I ended up living for 4.5 years, which was, right there, just 100 yards upriver from there is where I lived and apprenticed, where I built my first house, and that location was 500 yards from the great Grand Master Elder Medicine Man's house, which was a tiny little, local jungle dwelling with a leaf roof and a palm bark floor. And his name was Maestro Julio Llerena Pinedo. And he accepted me when he was in his mid 80s. And I was his final apprentice to be carried in his lineage through to being given the title Maestro.
Man, what a story. It's a beautiful life you've lived. And I wonder about all the stuff that we bring into this experience. I'm 40 now, so I've got 40 years of potentially stuff that needs to be defragmented in your language. I hear you using the word healing a lot, but I've also heard you use the word liberation.
Hmm.
And there was a liberation of something that was either something that happened to you or through you in those early years, or maybe it was something inherited karmically or something else. What do you think you were liberated from whenever that lemon-sized thing came up? I mean, you said depression, but like what was it really? Depression's almost like it seems like the expression of something.
Yeah, I mean, it was accumulation of trauma, really, that I didn't have a way to process. When babies and young children get traumatized in the forest, they have a way to process and heal that.
Mm.
And I feel like in our culture, we don't, and we store it. And they become early personality shaping events for us. And then you hear about, child psychologists going down and breaking it down into the past, even into birth trauma, and then from there, or in utero trauma, and then into there. And in my case, it was trauma. I had experienced a number of accidents very early in my life, including massive head trauma before I was 2 years old, and then other accidents along the way, and other forms of abuse and mistreatment that just built up. And it was a accumulation of,
Hmm.
what they would call big T trauma, little T trauma, and just what I call normal everyday life experience, which isn't always as
Yeah,
subtle or as nice as you would like. And so I think it was just that. It was this sort of like something that you would hold deep in kind of your abdomen area, and kind of a shock to
sure.
certain aspects of life itself. I feel like that's what came out of me that day.
Hmm. So this is powerful stuff. We like to, in the West, we like to think of it as like take the pill for, the problem. And this sounds like far more of like a process that you go through. Um, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, you probably meet a lot of people like me who come through the Western medical system and they're like, yeah, but I mean, what are we talking about here? Like there's not this measurable thing, and therefore I don't know how to dose the thing and expect a certain outcome. And so what I found is even with like mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, for example, somebody will say, well, what dose is good for this? Or which dose should I take for this? And so there's been almost like a bastardization of the process. And so, in your experience now for 20 years, what are some of the detriments of I'll just use the word westernization of plant medicines? And how do you sort of reorient people to this process?
First of all, the plant medicines are ancestral medicines.
Hmm.
So those are our ancestral medicines, humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, ancestral medicines. They've been around in the archaeological record for as long as people have been using medicines of different kinds. And cannabis was one of the earliest, and psilocybin mushrooms are found. And so we want to understand that our ancestors had a cultural way of addressing medicine and needs. And in the last 500 years, we've developed a lot of new methods, you know, that altered the nature of how we understood practice and culture around the use of that medicine. But that doesn't mean that in the last 500 years, that renders the previous 25,000 or 50,000 years of human evolutionary culture and the creation of medicines irrelevant.
Mm,
On the contrary, the last 500 years should help clarify the relevance of the previous 50,000.
mm,
And we have a right to all of our medicines because we find ourselves here within the earth in a great cosmos and find ourselves at times needing medicine. So it does not make any sense to me to restrict both the practices when performed with integrity and ethics by people who are trained to do so, or restrict the access to medicines when properly used.
mm,
And so I would like to think that in the next 20, 30 years, especially as the externally imposed restrictions on the study of these medicines is finally released, because of their scheduling in the 1960s and 1970s, it forced an absence of the bringing of real science over the last 40 years during a time of tremendous scientific expansion and exploration will finally be brought to these
yeah.
medicines. And then we're going to understand with the mind that's been developed over the last 500 years, what about the ancestral and traditional ways has a verifiable data-driven way to explain its efficacy.
Mm,
But these medicines that are known for having specific anecdotal efficacy at a rate as high, if not higher, than Western treatments when they are accepted by the FDA and when they're accepted by other governing bodies as a viable treatment, well over 80 percentile into 90 percentile efficacy. That is only giving greater understanding and context to something that our ancestors knew and that the lineages to the day know. Now, part of this is an awareness as well that in many of the places in the world where these lineages still exist and still wield the power of these ancestral medicines are areas where there has been great war and conquest. Like
mm,
down where I live, it was the pre-Incan and then the Incan and then the Spanish. and then the liberation of the Spanish. So for these lineages to survive, they buried the nature of their medicine and the truth that sits behind it so that they could protect it from the onslaught of war and appropriation. And it's just in the last 20 years from the work by people like I have done to help open that and make it accessible to others, along with the explanation of its efficacy and how it works. And I'm grateful that the lineages have started to open to share some of these miraculous medicines with the world. When you go into the visionary plant medicines, what you have to understand is that there are three components that are working at the same time. And right now, only one of those components is really well respected and understood by allopathic medicine or Western medicine. And that's really just the plant itself.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, we understand that in the dosification of the plant that there are unique sensitivities to each individual, but there is a threshold to go from a non-perceptible dose or microdose into a perceptible dose. And that's the threshold that you're really looking for. And once somebody goes into the perceptible dose threshold, once they cross that threshold, there is a range in which they can have a comfortable experience. And then there's also a range beyond that where it transcends their ability to maintain composure. And so
Mm.
you're looking for a dose that is between the perceptible dose and the ability to maintain composure. And you have to have a lot of practice, like a residency.
Yeah.
The equivalent would be a residency, a lot of practice sitting alongside masters who are practicing this to be able to understand that difference. And
Yeah.
it doesn't, with these medicines, for some reason, follow a lot of the other ways that you would think of this, like age or weight or, milligram by pound or by kilo. Those things don't always work the same way
Yeah.
with these
Yeah.
medicines.
Yeah.
That's the physical dosing side of it. And that's presuming that you have well-prepared medicines. The problem in the Western, limitation of access to these is that often people are working with ill-prepared medicines or medicines that are being prepared by people that are willing to sell them, and the lineages don't sell their medicines. So if you're being offered these medicines somewhere in the world, it's not being created by people from lineage because they make the medicines for themselves in the recipes of their lineage, and they do not transfer or sell those. Like at Blue Morpho, I still to the day make all of the medicines that we share. So if we
Wow.
use ayahuasca, I make it by hand and I know the plants and where they come from. We cultivate our own plants or we access plants from people that we know that are highly trustworthy. And if I work with San Pedro, I make the San Pedro that is offered to people in our experience or on our retreats. So you have to, understand those component elements of it. So presuming you have really high quality medicine, right? The practitioners would know the intensity of theirs and be able to work with you to diagnose the amount that you should have.
Mm.
Once you get into that aspect of it, now you're in the experience. And there is the part of the experience that I consider to be more governed by what we would study in the realm of psychology. It's the conscious, subconscious, unconscious mind. It's the archetypal, the elements that are found that are deeper than just our normal thinking waking state. And that's where we start to see what people describe of as these shapes in light or these entities or spirits or plant medicine spirits, animal spirits. This is where they also talk about speaking with ancestors or communicating or being in the presence of other kinds of beingness. And it's common whether it's with large dose cannabis or ceremonial dose psilocybin, peyote, San Pedro, Hauchuma, or ayahuasca. And also an ibogaine, or iboga. It's identical. And then you start to see beyond that. So that's the psychological journey. You'll hear a lot about that. People confronting their ego, people releasing deep trauma found within. And then there's a third part that gets spoken about less, which is just deeply mystical. It's something innate and inherent about existing. It's an existential phenomena. It's about something so deep within you, it's hard for people to put it in words. It's where then all of the recognition that comes out in the stories that people tell about the experiences of the oneness, the connection to something greater, a greater intelligence, a greater power, a greater force, a greater interconnectedness that helps to reframe and reset the container for the experience that they're having. And so these three elements exist. And I think until Western medicine understands that these are three uh, necessitated components to the process, they're always going to be misunderstanding
Right.
one aspect or another about it. And, I'm really lucky that I've been able to specialize in this and spend 20 plus years, and I've done thousands of ceremonies myself to have the experience to understand that these three elements are always present in people's experience. And so they have equal importance, and we must find a way to study them.
Yeah.
We have to find a way to be able to bring evidence-based understanding for them and why they are innate and inherent to the healing and transformational process of working with these medicines.
I mean, that just that little 5 minutes there should really make people consider who is it that you're sitting with. Because if they haven't done the work, and I don't, it's not like medical school in the sense that you're not taking tests after year one and then taking tests after year two and after year four, pass equals MD. It sounds to me like it's more of how intense is the experience through which you are starting to learn those principles. And so in general, how long does it, it's not a fair question, I know, but how long would you expect somebody to like really start to appreciate that? Is it a number of sits with the medicine? Is it a number of facilitations before you get it? Like, what's your general thought? Years, months, decades?
Sure. I mean, there's a few ways to traditionally kind of create a container for training. And you'll see that, traditional training usually lasts somewhere between 5 and 15 years. And once somebody goes into training, it is continuous. There's no break, there's no holiday. And you're also considered to be trained through your dream time, the psychological transformation that happens while you sleep. And so it is truly 24 hours a day form of training. And there are tests that you take all the time, but it's not a written exam type of test. It's a test that are called tests of virtue, where you are being observed by the people who are training you, the lineage holders that are training you. And if you don't pass the test, they make you retrain and take the test again.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to pass a number of different skill sets that you know allow you to be considered titled. And you have to learn how to dose, diagnose, um, navigate the nature of vision through all different levels of intensity. So they take you from almost imperceptible dose all the way to unconsciousness, like where there's so much plant medicine you cannot maintain consciousness. And you do that over and over and over again to learn the extent of the elasticity of your
Yeah.
ability to perceive and how to navigate through those experiences. And you have to be able to perform a series of ancestral tests that demonstrate the nature of your connection and your ability to relate to these substances. They're not, across all of the traditions of the world that work with them, never are they treated the way you see Western medical doctors treat a pill.
Yeah.
They treat a pill as a kind of object, inert, that has some kind of chemical interaction, and they give it to you. All of the other traditional lineages treat the plants as some kind of great teacher or some kind of living presence. And so you have a series of tests associated with that where you have to demonstrate the nature of the alignment and what you've learned from that teacher to be able to be titled. And like I say, it's an ancestral process that has existed for thousands of years. And, I got to live through that. I'm one of the first Westerners that we've ever heard of that actually lived through traditional apprenticeship and survived it. And so through that, I understand a little bit more about what that takes. My training took 14 years. So I
Oh,
was titled very young in my training, but I actually continued training regardless of that for 14 years before I took a break. And so, it's an extensive amount of practice to be able to adequately sit and support others on your own. And I'm not seeing that in the
Yeah.
psychedelic renaissance and the Western adoption of these medicines. I see very few people taking the amount of time that it really takes to learn how to master these, to uh, be able to work with them and perform them with the kind of efficacy that you would expect from an indigenous lineage.
Yeah. Use the word perform there, and I think it's an appropriate time to even go a little bit further in ceremony. A lot of people, mushrooms are a great example, LSD, whatever. Set and setting, bro, and you take it, you put on some nice music maybe, and you're off on your journey. And that is fine. I mean, I've been doing that on my own. It's really the only option I have right now. Um, but if I was going to sit with ayahuasca, I would really love to have somebody like you there because you're not playing a passive role. You're not just setting it up and like sitting back on your iPhone and letting people have a good time. You're deeply, deeply, deeply in the work within the ceremony. So maybe you can just describe a little bit when you are facilitating for a group, like when you're facilitating for me in September. What is your job? Beyond the dosing, preparing the medicines, getting people dieta. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, Figuring out, how are we going to lay everything out here? Now they've taken the medicine. What is your job as the maestro, the shaman, the facilitator?
Um, First is to guide everybody through the totality of the experience, and you do so with sound and percussion, chants, and what are called icaro. And you have to be able to read the room, so you become aware of everything that's taking place and everybody, uh, the state that they're in, and the support and help that they need. And so, part of the term maestro is a maestro of an orchestra. You're orchestrating many moving parts at the same time to uh, support and help everybody. And part of it is bridge and conduit for them between their normal waking states of mind and the realms that people navigate in vision, and helping them and supporting them in the navigation of that. And that comes through having a deep, extensive knowledge of the realms that you explore while in visionary consciousness, while you're in ceremony or ceremonial consciousness, and supporting people in, having that interaction in a way that's safe, that's foreign to them. It's, starts to sound more sci-fi than
Yeah.
sci. It
Mm.
starts to go into this realm of magical and mystical. It's more Harry Potter than most people would recognize. And then, as you navigate that through an entire ceremony, it's also understanding how the encounters with these different kinds of energies can actually positively support, which is part of what's called plant spirit medicine in the forest. So
Mm.
there's the plant and then the spirit part of it, and it's understanding its nature and its energy and how the interactions with those energies support the ceremony and the individual. It could help them purge. It could be introduced into their body to create the healing opportunity. It can also be to remove different kinds of energies from them and extract, built up energy that's within the body that can come out in different forms, sometimes physical, sometimes in these great spiritual or mythological expressions. And, on the other side of it, people had an encounter with, for them, what was either the only believed in, the mythological, or the unknown. That for the people who practice plant spirit medicine here in the forest is just an understanding of how they practice.
Mm.
And so you have to learn how to read it and know it, navigate it, and support with it. And there are ancestral means in which to do that. And I've also pioneered in my own practice ways to build on that, always respecting the indigenous ways, but also recognizing, just like in Western medicine, some of the greatest beauty of Western medicine is the continued exploration and pursuit of new techniques and new technologies that improve upon how we did something in the past. And so I've always felt that way about this. And so I've also pioneered my own ways of practice to better support those that
Yeah.
are in ceremony. And the stories can go all the way from somebody being aware of a greater presence in their space, feeling like something is inside them making changes, all the way to anecdotal stories that sound supernatural in their context and even science fiction. And then you just listen to the nature of the stories that people tell and understand that that's the journey that they were experiencing through their conscious, subconscious, and unconscious during that part of the ceremony.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great I want to introduce a book. Have you read the book Buddha in Red Face
Mm-mm.
by a guy named Eduardo Duran? I believe he's Navajo heritage, but he went in the full Western clinical psychology route, cognitive behavioral therapy, and he was working adjacent to a reservation somewhere in the sort of mountainous area north of northern United States. And a woman walked into his clinic and said, "Hi, I dreamt of you. I think you can help me." And this is a guy with CBT. I mean, like, this is as rigid in the scientific community. Freud versus Jung, like, get out of that dream stuff. But here, this lady is saying, can you help me? And and he was like, the author, that he was very early on in this sort of new sort of reformation of his own understanding of the psyche. And he said, well, I'm not sure. Did the dream have any meaning to you or whatever? She was like, oh, yes, I'm sure it did. But have you dreamt of me? And he said, no. She said, okay, I'll come back once you've dreamt of me. And he was like, what? He went to his mentors and talked about this, and they thought he was like totally, this is just wackadoo. This lady probably needs some real help. She's seeing things or whatever else. And this notion of what ends up evolving in the story is they get into the sort of dreamscape where actually the psyche is playing when we go to sleep and even in your waking dreams. And this sounds, when I read this book, I'm actually just finishing it now, and I'll bring you a copy in September. I really would love your insights on this. He ends up sort of changing his mind all about this, getting into dream interpretation. And this is with, indigenous Native Americans, from the reservations that are coming to get help with addictions and all sorts of other things. But an appreciation for what's happening in dreams through the Western mind, we say that it might as well be a hallucination. It's not real. It was in the dream. And so the same thing happens if I come back from sitting with Maestro Hamilton and I say, I experienced God, like the person you met, like the hands of God. People are going to be like, yeah, but you were hallucinating. So there's an important distinction here between fact and fiction. And so how did you cultivate a practice whereby you're testing what it is? And I don't mean testing like you have to verify it or anything, because sometimes that's not really going to be possible. But you do seem to have a big part of your teaching anyways, and that's been very helpful to me, is you need to be very, very clear about when you're interpreting something to fit some story that you have versus being a little bit more objective in that experience, which is hard when we're talking about either dreaming or an ayahuasca experience. I imagine. I haven't done ayahuasca, but it's certainly hard with mushrooms. So speak to that a little bit, because I think a lot of people delude themselves into feeling like, oh my gosh, I am, Jesus Christ, and I'm now here. And maybe they are, but how do they orient themselves to the experience so that they're not deluding themselves?
I think it starts with the desire to maintain a basis in fact. And you can come out of an experience and say anything. You can come out of a movie and say you're the character from the movie. You can have a dream and think you're someone else. So there's a context associated with the nature of your experience. And I think you need to leave it in that context and then work with it to understand the impact that it has on the rest of your life. So, you know, as somebody works through the awarenesses associated with their ego, it's often common in the space that you'll hear people say, I am this, like, I am Christ. And then they'll come out and they'll, say, I am this other mythological being. And maybe for that moment in ceremony, they really felt that way. But that doesn't mean that that's the root of their identity.
Mm,
And so you help people ground and understand that for a period of time, they can be interacting in states of consciousness that could seem very expanded to them, but that ultimately that there's a fundamental truth to all of these experiences, which is just natural to a state of awakening. I had to come to accept that what people normalized as common experience was just a very small sliver of a pie graph of experience.
Hmm.
And then there were terminology given to the rest of experience. Oh, that's imagination, that's dream, that's hallucination, that's vision. I said, okay, well, leave those experiences in those buckets. What importance does that dream have for me? Do I only give importance to the waking state experience of my mind? Why do I have dreams at all if they have no importance to me?
Hmm.
Okay, I had a hallucination. What does that mean? What information can I take from that? Do I believe that? Maybe not. Maybe I don't create a belief about that experience. I just leave it be. I had a vision and an interaction with something that I don't normally interact with. Is there any meaning for that? Does it have meaning for me?
Hmm.
Can it provide something of greater support and help in my life and what I'm doing? And so I just learned to leave each experience in the bucket of its own contextualization and just let it sit there until there was something more to understand from it. Most of them I just found to be fascinating. I found dreams and imagination to be fascinating, along with the experiences that you have inside, these medicine ceremonies. And I didn't feel the need to always try to directly represent that back to what I considered to be, my grounded understanding of reality. Say, well, that's just another kind of experience. I also see people all the time trying to use their mind as if their mind's view of reality is reality. But the funniest thing about that is that your mind can't actually show you reality because you don't have an aperture wide enough to contain everything that's happening.
Right.
Someone walks around and says, "This is what I'm experiencing. This is it." And I want to say, yeah, what about the other 8 billion people's experiences right now that do not reflect your point of view? So at best, your mind can present you point of view. You're in a conversation with one other human, not even the other 8 billion points of view of human point of view. They don't have your point of view nor your context. And it's the root of a lot of our conflict is that instead of coming to a conversation, understanding that the other person cannot think like you, dream like you, see like you, provides a greater aperture of awareness. And it's currently in our Western cultures to think that our narrow mindedness is reality. And it's woefully negligent and impossible for that view to actually be comprehensive enough to represent what's going on.
This sounds like, this is kind of makes me feel like taking the medicine actually isn't the magic trick. The magic trick happens in the integration and sort of what you do with that experience. Um, I don't feel like people are doing enough integration, and including myself. I think sometimes, there was in the Blue Morpho community thread, somebody had asked about headaches afterwards, and I knew exactly why they were getting headaches. And it's not because I'm an intuitive like Edgar Gacy. It's because as soon as we end up finishing, we have to go back to the rigmarole of our daily life, and we get onto Instagram, and we start just popping those dopamine hits, and it just is overwhelming. Like you just had this extraordinary experience. So maybe talk a little bit about um, the ideal. There's not like a prescribed way to integrate, but maybe talk about the importance of integration and how that is a really the only path forward in progressing through the the journey to either becoming liberated or becoming maybe a facilitator.
Um, I think if it starts in contextualization,
Hmm.
and the ceremonies themselves provide incredible opportunities for healing and transformation in the ceremony itself. There's an opportunity to somehow release from the body or transcend the nature of the complex behavior that is creating the problem
Mm.
or the need for healing in the first place. One thing when it's, tissue oriented and it's physical, there's a cellular, molecular, atomic process that we know that's taking place. But when it's psychological, it's less understood. So there's this a nature of being able to overcome, certain rooted behaviors and ways of feeling and seeing and thinking during the ceremonies themselves. But what comes next is the process of now assimilating or integrating the fact that you've made a change at all. And, we know from certain now studies that this, what's described as a neuroplastic event happens. There's a window of time that you can make great change to your own neural net and the way your own brain functions. But then there's also a recognition of how long it really takes to root and change behavior. And so at Blue Morpho for the last 20 years, I've always explained that a week at Blue Morpho is 6 months to a year process.
Mm.
It's not a 6 or 7 day process. You're starting a 6 month to a year long process with an acute intervention at a plant medicine retreat or week of plant medicine treatment, depending on the variety of ceremonies that you participate in. And that is the beginning of something, not the end of something. So it's a contextualization of how you orient the experience. We just finished a retreat. The process didn't end, it began. The process now of going home, ingraining new behaviors, maintaining a recognition of a higher order consciousness or awareness about your own place in the world and your experience, the changing of certain kinds of behavioral patterns and what you consume or consumptive patterns, like you said about Instagram, I consider it digital consumption,
Hmm.
foods you eat, that's physical consumption, drinks you drink, the recognition of what it means to put something in you. All right. People say, I put that in my body, but you put it in you, not just in your body. That's now in you. What does that mean to put something in you and to have you have to process that thing, whether it's to assimilate it or expel it or break it down into caloric energy? That's you know, not an abstraction. So what responsibility is there for what you do? And through that process, I recommend to everybody really three things to keep it really simple. The first is that you integrate in community. You don't integrate by yourself. You don't have a frame of reference of even how to integrate by yourself. You need support. You need people who have had these experiences and that have walked the path with you and alongside you. And so we integrate in community. It's so important that I offer bi-monthly free integration sessions for people all over the world. We get together and we talk about the experiences, especially the anomalies people are experiencing. We learn from each other. We recontextualize and we support each other. We also do that through online communities like, chat apps where people can have access to just support from others, even if it's just to be emotionally supported or to receive some kindness as you go through the process. The second part of it is to make small changes repetitively in your daily experience, in your waking experience. That's point number two. Point number two is not dramatic changes. Dramatic changes don't integrate. Dramatic changes need integration. So integration are lots of little changes over time. So some people say, well, what do you mean by that? And I say, well, how do you start a waking state? People call it typically their day, but I say you wake up. You're now in a waking period, not a sleeping period. During your waking period, how do you start it? I always start mine in real positivities of things I love, and then I always start it with real gratitude. And the point of that is to raise vibration. The part of that is to raise the positivity level, to raise the positive neurotransmitters in the brain. So you can't fake it and you can't lie it. You have to actually find things that you really love and bond with and remember those and have those in your awareness. Yeah. So I have dogs and I love them. So I see my dogs, boom, first one, right? I love life, boom, second one. Right? And they're there and you find those. So just that starts your day
Yeah.
differently. Right? So I recommend many of those throughout your day, tiny little things that help that. And then the final one is how you use your dream time. And I was taught that by the elders in the forest. You do deep psychological processing actually when you're in REM sleep. You're not even aware of it. That's when you do deep, deep decompression and psychological processing. And so you use intention for that. You don't try to control your dreams or lucid dream. So when your head hits your pillow, you set your intention. It's like talking to the inner you from the heart. Right? It doesn't have to be put into words. It's why you did this in the first place. Maybe it's because you want to get better about something or you want to improve something in your life. We call it intentionality and we teach it in our community. It's it's kind of what when you want to like walk across the room right before you go, there's the impetus to go and get
Yeah.
up and walk across the room. It's that impetus that we're talking about, this thing that is birthed within us to do something. So when we go to sleep, we affirm that attention so that to ourselves, it's not, you know, you can, if you believe, to speak to some greater power that's beyond you, but it can also just be to yourself through the heart why you're doing anything. It's a goal setting, it's a alignment with what you're trying to accomplish, achieve, or create in the world. And you speak to your own subconscious. And then you go to sleep. And we find that there's ample time to integrate and process through that. And if you do those three things over 6 months to a year post plant medicine, you'll see at the end of 6 months to a year that there will have been dramatic and measurable improvement in your life in any of the directions that you've set your intention.
Yeah. And I always wonder about the people who are like I mentioned before, I've done ayahuasca so many times and I'm still healing and I got to go down every spring and fall and got to do more and it's hard work. And I do tend to wonder, like, what does that integration period look like? Because I wonder if they were doing, if maybe they had somebody guiding them through appropriate integration. I wonder if would have, they would find that liberation a little bit more quickly. Um, it's sort of like the medicine journey itself opens the door and you have to step through, and that stepping through is the integration. That might even be the most important part. I don't know if you would agree with that. Certainly seems like the biggest part that's lacking often in drop some mushrooms and see what happens. Like there that could be helpful, and you could also maybe see some you get even more benefit with the integration. It's not talked about, I think, very much.
If someone asked me, how do I get the most out of this? Right? Say somebody has childhood trauma they're carrying with them, or they've been through a divorce, or they lost a career, or you know, they had a big injury, and just something's off now.
Yeah.
And they know it. Just give it a perspective. Something's off. They want to heal this thing. I'd get really focused before going to any plant medicine. That's what you're working on. It's not just a random experience. I'm going to have this experience, and we're going to heal this. Number one. Number two, I would, before I take the medicine, I would tell it. As you talk to the elders and they say, this is a great teacher, this is an intelligent being, speak with it in that way. And I would say, I want the gentlest, fastest path to healing associated with this. Whatever that is, the gentlest and fastest path. And to get this to a point where I know I'm done. Like this is done. Just like you would check anything off a box and you'd be like, yep, when it's done, it's done. I cleaned the house, it's done. Not I need to go clean it and clean it and clean it for the same reason. Like something spilled on the floor. I cleaned it, it's done. I move on. Same concept.
Yeah.
Right? I washed my car, the car's washed. I don't keep washing the car. Yeah, it's going to get dirty again. Sure, it can, but that's done. Okay. I want this acute problem and I want to solve it. I want all the help I can get from the medicine to do so, and all the help from the practitioner and the greater, however you can contextualize that. I like to think of universe, the greater universe, anything in there to be able to help me. Now, I'm going to dedicate myself to this process until it's done. And then I would go into the ceremonies and see what comes out of that, and then go home and integrate that. And when the medicine called me forward to not do that again, but if I needed to progress on that intention and have more ceremonies to support the nature of that progression, then I would participate in those. And I would carry that forward until that was done. And I think that's the fastest way that you can move through any kind of core intention around healing.
Yeah, beautiful. Kind of bouncing around here, and I just have a couple more questions. There is a process of intention setting and deciding you're going to do this. And then, of course, there's going to be some preparation for that. The loose term for that is a dieta. Um, Talk about a dieta for ayahuasca and why is it important that we're not eating pork, maybe not having sex, not drinking alcohol? You did, I'll share a little story again from your book. And the book I keep referencing, guys, is Secrets of Ayahuasca, Part One, Medicine versus Sorcery. We can talk about sorcery maybe at the very end, because people are going to be wondering about that. Um, you talk about having you spray your face with like a perfume or something, and a drop gets on your tongue, and through I think you were working with Toa, but for all intents and purposes, you're in ceremony and you retch and you remove this little drop, or fizzy soda that you had consumed before ceremony. What is going on here with the dieta? Like, why is this so critical? Because I think it also tends to fall into a little bit of dogmatism around like this is how it has to be done. But I'm sure that there actually is some rationale behind some of these things. So maybe to speak to that a little bit.
First of all, there are many lineages that are dogmatic lineages, and they have rules and regulations. And those rules and regulations are designed for a certain kind of outcome and safety before the nature of your experience. And it's hard to discern between, just basic need and dogma. So please understand that, in my opinion, some of the lineages out there are dogmatic in their nature, and they like the nature of the discipline associated with that dogma. And so those are the rules, and that's the way it is. And some elder in the past decided that that was the way that it
Yeah.
was. And that just is dogma. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to decide whether or not you want to experience that dogma and go along with it. I
Mm.
liked to have deep reason behind everything
Yeah.
and less dogma, or no dogma. And before going into plant medicine, what I found is that it is possible to not follow most of those practices, but it dramatically affects the experience you have. So you can go right into an ayahuasca ceremony. I've seen it happen where healers have prescribed ayahuasca in acute emergency situations for somebody when they have not prepared at all for that experience. And it's dramatically more difficult psychologically, physically, etc. And so part of the preparation is to adequately prepare your body so that you better assimilate the nature of the plants and better assimilate the experience itself. The first one. When it comes to certain kinds of mind altering substances, including alcohol, and I wish it were different, but alcohol fundamentally is a poison.
Mm.
And when you tax your body with this poison in the form of alcohol before going into the plant medicine ceremony, there's two commonalities that happen. One, what we would call lower your vibrational state. And so moving from that lower vibrational state to a higher vibrational state is difficult on the body. And if someone didn't understand that, it would say like, well, think about how you feel when you feel really good and think about how you feel when you feel hungover and things are cloudy and kind of a little darker internally, emotionally, and you just don't feel as good and you're not as sharp, you're not as clear. That's what they're talking about. I would relate that to a vibrational state or an energetic state. When it comes to the nature of heavy fats and heavy foods, it has to do with the nature of how your liver and gallbladder and your digestive system processes those fats. And so there's a combination associated with heavy fats that is unique and interesting. But now there's also a unique and interesting intercultural relationship between pork and wild boar in the forest. So some of these restrictions come from not pork, but rather wild boar.
Mm.
And certain wild boar eat seed pods that store toxins in their fat. And they're only toxic to you, to humans, when you drink certain plant medicines that tax your liver. So all of a sudden, your ability to process the toxins that are found within the stored fats of the animal tissue that you're eating in the presence of plant medicine creates a kind of secondary symptom or a secondary illness.
Did you ever try that one out? I'm curious.
That's right. I've
Let's see how
unfortunately
it goes.
pushed many of these boundaries and have found that there was reason behind all of this.
Yeah.
In the nature of sexual activity, I think sexual activity a day or two before the plant medicine ceremony is helpful simply because through sexual activity you excrete a lot of different neurotransmitters, and so you change the nature of your brain chemistry, and now you're going to put plant medicines in that also dramatically alter your brain chemistry. And so I think it's no different than why there's contraindication to other brain chemistry altering plants and supplements like MAOIs, SSRIs, and other kinds of MAOI oriented plants like passion flower, uh, etc. So there's
Yeah.
these natural restrictions associated with that. And so I think if you look at them, there's reason for it. And then if you think about, capsicum and spicy foods, that's a stomach and bowel irritant. And now you're going to put a plant in that one is supposed to be healing associated with that, but also can produce purging.
Mm.
And so I think that there's a good rationale for most of these. And then when you look at the concentrated sugars, first of all, we did not evolve to have so much concentrated sucrose and fructose in our lives. Like, when you eat fruits, not drink juices all the time, when you eat fruits, there's a lot more just cellulose and mass associated with processing the nature of sugars. But we now have lots of highly concentrated sugars in our life, and that creates a very different reaction inside your pancreas and your insulin, and fundamentally alters also how you process information, process your own blood sugar.
Yeah.
So all of that gets restricted for those reasons. And what I found is that if you want to get the most out of the experience, the minimal amount of time that I recommend, not the most, you can always do more, but the minimal amount of time is 3 to 4 days without alcohol and 1 to 2 days without sexual intercourse, and 1 to 2 days restricting from heavy meat fats and fried foods, and also 2 to 3 days the refined sugars. And I found less than that and symptoms show up for certain individuals, and more than that and it's just more, you're starting to move into the belief system space. And if you that's what I found to be the minimum. And same thing on the other side of the ayahuasca ceremonies. The ayahuasca takes 3 days to be fully processed in the body. And then you want to respect that period of time as a time of great delicacy as you're processing the plant medicines and the experience you had.
What about something, you use ayahuasca, you use, at least it sounds like you're using mostly ayahuasca now, but, psilocybin, mushrooms, cannabis, some of these other things. What about, I don't want to say mixing them because I'm not suggesting like, okay, I'm going to take a CBD gummy or a THC gummy and then take a cup of ayahuasca. But let's say somebody uses takes a hit of a joint, the day after, and they're just relaxing, integrating, and they take a hit of a joint. What about that, or the day, or even before? Because these are plants that you work with separately, do they like kind of conflict with one another and they kind of get tangled up in the psyche?
So there's, traditional ways of looking at this where they say that some of the plants, can have that happen. They can kind of get tangled up. But my recommendation is that if you're not following the nature of the restrictions, you've
Yeah.
not added plant medicine to plant medicine.
Right.
So did you add the right plant medicines? You take a certain kind of prescription medicine, it says, don't mix alcohol with this. You go, but hey, I just wanted to relax. Well, you're
Yeah.
contraindicated. You shouldn't do that. Certain kinds of medicines say, while on these medicines, don't operate cars or heavy machinery because they're going to affect the nature of how you perceive. It's same thing with these medicines. So you want to understand the complex profile. And if you're training with the medicines and you decide to mix plant medicines, you have the responsibility of learning how to harmonize them.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to harmonize the nature of these medicines and energies together. No one's going to tell you it's right or wrong to do this. Certain lineages will say you can, certain lineages will say you can't. You're going to have to discern through the dogma. So, from my perspective, you have to learn how to, engage and interact with them in a way that is supportive of your practice, supportive of your intentions, or you're doing something to harm yourself, which is, transcendent of the ethics and integrity of medicine-based practice.
Yeah.
So it's up to you. I've found that there's great benefit in working with psilocybin and cannabis in close conjunction with each other, but in smaller doses.
Yeah.
I find you have to be careful about the nature of synergies and synergistic experience around dose. And I found that there's great benefit in working with ayahuasca and San Pedro, Hauchuma cactus
Mm.
in using San Pedro Hauchuma to integrate ayahuasca experiences. But then you also have to understand the nature of dose. And so we dose down the Hauchuma and we turn it into an integrative experience and an integrative ceremony. And so, as you can work with different medicines, you have to be careful of that. And also, as just a word of warning, in the psychedelic renaissance, is this concept of what they call stacking. Taking one medicine after another in conjunction with each other for the psychedelic experience of it. And there's very little evidence for any kind of understanding of a detrimental expression of that over time.
Yeah.
And so part of this is quite experimental. And I just warn against that so that you can, maintain your own levels of efficacy and safety as you engage with this. It's not good enough, to make a decision around your own mental health and well-being in association with this just because someone else did it and they said it was a good experience. It
Right.
requires, a lot more just investigation, awareness, and good choice making, especially in and around the intercombining of these plant medicines. The safest, of course, is use one and let it completely process through your system. Make sure you're in an adequate frame of mind and state to use another one, and to do so with the appropriate kind of supervision. And if you're trained, especially through our courses, how to be able to provide that supervision for yourself.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm going to save the plant dieta experience for our next conversation, if that's okay. I want to be respectful of your time because I do want to spend the last couple minutes we have together, Hamilton, and thanks again, just from the heart for mentoring me even in these early stages. It's been really, really helpful. You're a very grounding presence for me. Even just on the phone, it feels really good to to have somebody who's like, yeah, it's okay. Very reassuring. Um, I want to just spend a couple minutes getting back to the title of your book, Medicine versus Sorcery, because you also did, experience quite a bit of, I don't want to say the darker side. I don't really believe that language, but how these medicines, can in the visionary experience, how sometimes the intentions of the person providing the medicine, how this actually can go sideways. And how I think a lot of people, they hear this in our sort of the Christian motifs that are so present in the United States that it sounds like sorcery. Can you just speak to why did you title your book Medicine versus Sorcery?
Yeah. If you read the book, you know,
It's pretty clear once you read the book, but
yeah, if you read the
maybe
book,
yeah.
the core teachings come from our lineage. There's three core teachings. The first is that to participate in this at all, you have to make a decision and stick with it. And the second one is it's inevitable that certain aspects of making that decision are going to bring certain difficulties to you, and you can't quit during that time. And as you go through that, you must follow your path that you've chosen through your path of heart to be able to navigate it. So it takes you through, like there's the four agreements and Toltec practices. This is, down here, a lineage that's broken down into three that are a really clear nature of path. And along that way, I think that there's the temptations that come along that I think are well known about now in the healing space that are described as shadow. It's the shadow aspects of ego and the shadow aspects of power, and all of the different ways that manifests inside people's psyches. And it happens that in many traditional cultures from around the world, also today's Western cultures in a different way, those shadow aspects of the psyche are actually empowered
Mm.
through many different kinds of practices. That not everybody is utilizing plants or meditation or yoga, for the same purposes. Not everyone is there for healing.
Mm.
And not all the practitioners are there solely for healing and helping others. Many of them are there for themselves or for, this pursuit of power. And it's just very well spoken about around the world. And it exists in the indigenous and ancestral lineages here in South America as well. And each traditional culture has a way of addressing that, you know, and finding their own balance with that. And so down here, there's just a very clear delineation between what's called medicine and what's called everything else. And so some of that is known as sorcery. And, some of those practices are not in the best interests of all the participants. And so it's something to be just aware of. And you have to decide for yourself if you want to engage
Yeah.
in those kinds of practices. So what I've seen is that, there are people that come down here to South America looking for medicine, and they're not really interested in occult spiritual practices. And they find themselves all of a sudden with a group of people who perform that or do that. And they thought that they were just there for a plant medicine ceremony.
Mm.
Maybe it's a flyer that says an ayahuasca ceremony, or it says a San Pedro ceremony, or maybe they heard from another, but they don't understand that there's a kind of spiritual practice that's being practiced. And I think if you look into it, you'll see that ancestrally those practices were practiced all over the world. So it's not just one tradition or another. It's not just one lineage. They were European, for the ancestry to this, as much as there is, Indian subcontinent, far East Asian, South American, sub-Saharan African, et cetera. It's everywhere. And so it's just an awareness of that. And early on in your training down here, that's the choice that you have to make. Are you making the choice of medicine or not? And I titled my book that one because it was the first recognition to become a medicine person down here, what you get confronted with. And it was also a form of warning to the people that come down to experience this. Please seek medicine. Please
Yeah.
seek the practitioners. Please support them. Please do the investigative research to understand who are the real medicine practitioners compared to other kinds of practitioners and also charlatans, because it's an unregulated space. So there's a lot of people who are posing and fronting, and it's very hard from a marketing perspective to differentiate yourself in the world. And so, it's a part of advocacy that I say to everybody, please seek the great medicine practitioners that exist in the world and support them. They're dedicating their life to helping others, including you. If you go to them, you have a much higher, exponentially higher potential outcome of a positive experience in their hands. That's what we want to see come into the world. That's what we want to see supported. That's going to help the reclassification of these substances to be respected by Western medicine. And so it needs to be a community effort. And the best way to do that is to support the people who are offering very high quality service and not supporting the people that are charlatans and actually causing harm
Yeah.
through their actions with the plants. The plants are neutral. And so it really does come down to the ethics and integrity of the practitioners. And so please support the people that are doing the best work in the world, and, the lineages that stand for the ethics and integrity found within the medicine-based practices.
Yeah. Well, that was a really awesome first conversation of, we'll space them out, but one of many. One final thing that I want to touch on is, we haven't talked much about the birth space and this and that, but you had mentioned in the past to me that there's a lot of traumatic things that come up. Um, I'm guessing for women, but perhaps also for men around birth. And when you're in these visionary experiences, maybe you can just like comment on the potential for these medicines to help with these undigested things that have happened to us. And I think childbirth is the greatest example. Maybe just comment on that. How is this coming up in ceremony, like in your direct experience, and why do you think it's important that we actually start using this as an application for birth?
Especially in and around birth, I just think of the biological reality associated with the profound transformative nature of going from, you know, bringing child into the gestation process and then through birth.
Mm.
And even to the day, even in a completely natural, completely normal birth experience, there's also intense pain. There's also the trauma to the pelvis that occurs. And then on the identity and relating side to life, you go from not being responsible for this new individual to being fully responsible for it. And for many, you're transitioning from, one archetype to another, which could be not yet mother or father to now mother or father. And I
Right.
just see that there's a fundamental lack of inherent rites of passage in our culture associated with helping people, one, make that transition and also just process that. And then on the case of, especially in postpartum depression, that's often a chemical imbalance that starts to take place. And so it's no one's fault. Something has changed dramatically chemically within the body. And I think that plant medicines can help re-regulate that, especially ayahuasca. And so I think if we have a tool that could support people go through what is, one of the most positive, life-changing and miraculous experiences of life, but also has this inherent built-in traumatic aspect associated with it, that you know, that's just a tool that we should use.
Yeah.
And for as modern medicine is, I'm astounded at how many difficult births there still are. So, of all my friends and family members that are going through that process, five of the last five have been dramatically traumatic and difficult.
Mm.
Four have ended up in emergency C-sections, after long and difficult labor experiences. So it's still something that many people are going through and just processing. And I feel like just like down here, there's medicine to help, uh, you know, children when they've gone through trauma in their childhood so that it doesn't root and become part of personality. We have these incredible medicines to help people that when they've gone through, any kind of difficult experience, especially childbirth. And if you could provide any service for children, helping parents be better parents and better suited to being parents, I think is the number one thing that you could offer children coming into this world. If a parent were just, a tenth of a percentage point happier or more grounded or better after having had the nature of that experience, the whole child's life would be impacted in a positive way.
Yeah.
And it's not just a tenth of a percent that you can improve. You can dramatically improve people's individual experiences and lives through this. And so that's why I think it's so important.
Me too. There's going to be a lot of people, Hamilton, who have impacted in some way by this conversation. Where do you want them to go first in order to start learning more?
Yeah, go to our website at bluemorpho.org. And, if you have any questions, just write us. We're accessible in the world. You can write us an email. You can go to info@bluemorphotours.com and write us an email. And, you know, we have all of our retreat and plant medicine experiences available there, as well as our courses. If you go to the bottom, there's a section on courses, and we train, like you spoke about. We train people to have safe home practices, know how to wield these plant medicines with integrity and purpose, so that people can be safe with them, do it from home, support each other, friends and family, and some people even go through the training to become professional practitioners. So the training is there for you at all levels of your ambition and desire to learn with them. And it's, part of our mission to make sure that people have the requisite skills to be able to continue to support others with these incredible tools. And we help you understand how to use psilocybin mushrooms, cannabis, San Pedro Hauchuma, and ayahuasca, as well as a universal framework that can be supportive for anybody. And I really want people to have the skills to be able to use these for the greatest purpose. And so
Yeah.
we have these courses as well, and they're self-paced. You can do them anywhere, in the world. And we have this vibrant community that supports you along the way, and I mentor you along the way. And so go to bloommorpho.org, and it would be a pleasure to get to meet you and work with you and support you through your learning and healing process.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maestro. Um, just for people to have some clarity around this, you can join from anywhere in the world. That's one of the things I've been most impressed with in the community is there's people from everywhere, and they're even holding space for one another in ceremony remotely, which is a really interesting thing that you've taken. I'm sure it happened during COVID, but you've actually adopted this practice of being able to support one another remotely. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's a really, really, I'm very, very grateful to have found you even ahead of starting this journey for myself. And I hope people will go to check that out. We'll link everything in the podcast description, but I'll let you get to your busy, very busy day. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation, Nathan. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to many more.
Yeah.